Hello, my friends. Welcome to Tommy Podcast on English Every Day. It's so good to have you here with me again. Picture this. You're walking down the street with your headphones on, and I'm right there, walking by your side, telling you a story. That's the feeling I want to create. Closeness, like two friends talking. Before we start, let me share a comment I got from Paula. She wrote, "Tommy, my red button was sleeping. I woke it up with one click, and now it won't stop smiling. I loved that. So, if your subscribe button is still asleep, wake it up right now." Today's topic is one of the most requested: how I trained my brain to think in English. I don't know if this happened to you, but in the beginning of my journey, I always translated everything in my head. Someone spoke in English. I turned it into Portuguese. I wanted to reply. I translated it back to English. It was like having an automatic translator inside me, but slow, heavy, and full of mistakes. Clearly remember a moment at work. A foreign colleague asked me something simple. "Do you want some coffee?" I understood the words, but my brain took the long road. First I translated, "Do you want coffee?" Then I thought, how do I say "yes, I want" in English? I took a few seconds, and when I finally said, "Yes, I want coffee," it already sounded weird. Late, I felt like a broken robot. That's when I realized I had to train my mind to think directly in English, without all this back and forth. But how could I do that? At first, it felt impossible. My mind was so used to Portuguese that it felt locked. But with time, I discovered the brain is like a muscle. You don't start lifting heavy weights, you start small, and you train until you get stronger. One day, I had a simple idea. I was having breakfast, and instead of thinking, "I'm eating bread" in Portuguese, I decided to think it straight in English. "I'm eating bread." It felt strange at first, like I was forcing my brain. But then I realized this was exactly the training I needed. Repeat with me now, as if you were also having breakfast. "I'm eating bread." Done. You just did the same exercise I used. To do. Little by little, I started doing this in other moments. Opening the door, I thought, "I'm opening the door." Washing the dishes, "I'm washing the dishes." These were simple sentences, but I was training my brain to skip the translation and go straight into English. And then I saw the magic. The more I practiced, the faster English came. I didn't need to translate anymore. I started to think directly. It was like my mind built a new road, shorter and faster. In this episode, I want to show you how I built this mental road, how I created small habits that made my brain switch languages naturally. And I promise, you can train your mind to do the same. In the beginning, training my mind to think in English felt like an impossible game. I was so used to Portuguese that even when I tried, the English sentences didn't come naturally. Many times I started a thought in English and finished it in another language inside my head. It was like having two radios on at the same time, and I couldn't tune in to just one. There's a scene I'll never forget. I was on the bus, trying to practice silently. I looked out the window and thought, "The bus is full." I tried to say it in English, and it came out slowly. "The bus is full." Then I started doubting myself. Was that right? I kept repeating it over and over in my head until I realized I was spending more energy doubting than actually training. That day I learned something important. The goal was not to always be correct. The goal was to train my reflex. Even if the sentence wasn't perfect, It was better to try than to stay silent. Repeat with me now, as if you were also on the bus. The bus is full. Simple. Direct. Another obstacle was mental laziness. It was much easier to keep thinking in Portuguese. Sometimes I remembered to practice in English, but my mind whispered, "Not now. It's too tiring." And I gave up. So I started using triggers to remind me. For example, every time I saw a door, I said in my mind, "Door." When I opened it, I thought, "I'm opening the door." I turned daily objects into practice reminders. One day, I was washing the dishes, and I looked at a plate. Instead of thinking plate in Portuguese, I forced myself to say in English, plate. Then I added a phrase, "I'm washing the plate." It might sound too simple, but these little repetitions were carving a new pattern in my mind. At first, it was a conscious effort, almost forced. But little by little, it became automatic. I like to compare it to learning how to drive. In the beginning, you think about every step, pressing the clutch, changing gears, checking the mirror. It feels impossible to do it all at once. But after enough practice, you drive without thinking. That's what happened with my English. At first, it was heavy, but then it became natural. Of course, it wasn't always easy. There were days I felt discouraged. I remember talking to a foreign colleague. He spoke fast. I understood half, and when I tried to answer, I got stuck translating in my head. In the end, all I managed to say was, "Yes, yes." I walked away frustrated, thinking nothing was working. But later, I realized even that frustration was part of the process, because I had understood half, and that was already progress. Next time, maybe I'd understand a bit more. It's like going to the gym. You don't see muscles growing in one day, but if you keep showing up, the results appear. One trick that helped me was narrating my actions, as if I were the commentator of my own life. If I was walking, I thought, "I'm walking." If I was drinking water, I said, "I'm drinking water." It gave me the feeling that English was always present, not just during study time. Repeat with me now, as if you were drinking water. I'm drinking water. That's how you build the reflex. Another discovery was that I didn't need to translate everything. At first, I forced myself to translate every detail, and it was exhausting. Later I saw I could start small, just with single words, table, chair, window, then slowly build them into sentences. That gave me lightness, because it didn't feel like an impossible task anymore, and to make it fun, I invented little stories in my head. For example, at the supermarket, I looked at an apple and thought, "The apple is red." Then I imagined someone asking me, "Do you like apples?" And I answered in my mind, "Yes, I like apples." It was like playing with myself. And surprisingly, that game helped my brain start thinking in English naturally. During that time, I learned something essential. The brain learns by use, not by theory. It doesn't matter how many rules you memorize. If you don't practice, your mind won't build the reflex. And reflex is born only when you practice in real situations, even if they're imagined in your head. Little by little, my brain began to switch channels. Instead of two radios playing at the same time, I could finally tune in to just one, English. After weeks of practicing this mental training, something surprising started to happen. In the beginning, I had to force myself to think in English, almost like carrying weight. But then, suddenly, some sentences began to appear on their own, without effort. I remember the first time I noticed it clearly. I was walking to work when it started to rain. My immediate thought was, it's raining. I didn't translate. I didn't go through another language. The sentence just appeared in my mind. At that moment, it felt like I had opened a new door inside my brain. Repeat with me now, as if you were also looking at the rain. It's raining. See how natural it feels? That's how I began to feel English flowing. Another moment happened in the elevator. A foreign neighbor walked in, smiled, and said, "Good morning." I answered without thinking. "Good morning? Nothing special." There. But then he asked, "How's your day so far?" Normally I would freeze, trying to translate. But to my surprise, it came out fast. "Good, thanks. And yours?" When the door opened and he walked out, I stayed there smiling. It felt like my brain had finally found the short path. This kind of automatic response showed me the mental training was working. Every time I narrated my actions, created dialogues in my head, and forced myself to think directly in English, I was building reflexes. And those reflexes appeared when I least expected them. Another strong memory was at work. A colleague dropped a pen on the floor. Before I even thought, the words came out, "It's under the table." He thanked me, picked it up, and we continued the conversation. Later, I asked myself, how did that sentence come out so easily? The answer was simple. Because I had practiced hundreds of short sentences in my daily life. Repeat with me now, as if you were pointing to the pen. It's under the table. That's when I saw the pattern. At first, my mind always searched for translation. But the more I practiced, the more natural it became to think directly in English. It was like building a new road inside my brain, shorter and faster. I like to compare it to riding a bike. At first, you think about every move, pedaling, holding the handlebars, keeping your balance. It feels impossible to put it all together. But after practice, you just ride without thinking. That's what happened with my English. In the beginning it was heavy, but then it became natural. Of course, it wasn't perfect all the time. There were moments when I still froze, still looked for words. But the big difference was this. Now, I could keep the conversation going, even with simple sentences. I wasn't paralyzed anymore. One example was in a coffee shop when the waitress asked, "Do you want milk in your coffee?" I could have translated everything in my head, but it came out directly. "No milk, please," and the conversation flowed. That moment taught me something valuable. You don't need to speak in a complicated way to be understood. The brain just needs to learn to respond naturally. Another breakthrough came with listening. Before, when someone spoke, I had to translate every word. Now I began to understand the general meaning without translating at all. I remember a meeting where a colleague spoke fast. I didn't catch every single word, but I got the idea. Thai was like watching a movie without subtitles and realizing you can still follow the story. These small victories built my confidence. Every time I thought or answered directly in English, it felt like winning a medal. And that feeling kept me motivated to continue. One simple but powerful moment was when I was cooking at home. I cut an apple and, without noticing, I thought, "The apple is sweet." Then I stopped and smiled. I hadn't planned it. I hadn't forced it. English was just there, inside my mind. Repeat with me now, as if you just bit an apple. The ETB, apple is sweet. That was the clearest sign that my mental training was working. I didn't need to translate every thought anymore. Little by little, English was becoming a second voice inside my head. And that was the turning point. Because once you start thinking in English, speaking English becomes natural. Fear gets smaller, fluency grows, and you finally feel the language is part of you. Today, looking back at this part of my journey, I can see the big change was not magic. It didn't happen overnight. It was slow, daily, almost invisible. Every time I narrated a simple action, every time I dared to think in English, I was training my brain to build a new path. At first, that path was like a trail in the woods, full of stones, hard to walk. But the more I walked on it, the clearer it became. Until one day, it turned into a road. And suddenly, English started to flow. Not because I was talented, but because I had trained my mind for it. I remember one scene that symbolizes this victory. I was traveling, and an older lady asked me at the airport, "Excuse me, is this seat free?" Before, I would have frozen. But that day, it came out naturally. Yes, it's free. Simple. Direct. She smiled, sat down, and we moved on, and I felt so proud. Not because of the phrase itself, but because it came without translation, without effort. Repeat with me now, as if you were answering the lady. Yes, it's free. Such a short phrase, but it carries a huge victory. Moments like this showed me that mental training brings silent results. You don't notice them every day. But suddenly, in a real conversation, English shows up as a reflex. And that's exactly what I want you to feel too. It doesn't matter how long you've been studying. It doesn't matter how many times you felt stuck. If you train your mind with simple sentences, every day, sooner or later, you will see the change. So let me sum up today's talk. I told you how, in the beginning, I translated everything in my head, and how that made me slow and insecure. Then I showed you how I started training my mind directly in English, narrating actions, using daily triggers, inventing short dialogues. I also shared how this started to appear in real situations. Automatic answers, understanding without translation, confidence growing. And the main message is clear. Thinking in English is training, not talent. It's like going to the gym. Chatter. First it hurts. It feels heavy. But later you get stronger. That's why I want to leave you with a practical challenge for the next days. Tomorrow, choose 3 moments in your routine and narrate them in English, in a low voice or only in your mind. It can be when you wake up, I'm getting up. At breakfast, I'm drinking coffee. At night, I'm going to bed. It doesn't have to be perfect. What matters is to train your mind to skip translation and go straight into English. And then come here and tell me in the comments, what sentence did you use in your mental training? I want to read it and maybe share it in future episodes. Before we finish, let me remind you of a truth that changed my journey. Consistency is more important than perfection. Don't wait for the moment when English comes out perfect. Start now, even if it's small, even if it's broken. Because every sentence you think in English is a seed, and with time, that seed becomes a tree. So next time you're in silence, let English fill that space. Say a short phrase, smile with it, and trust that your brain is learning, even if you don't see it right away. If this episode made sense to you, remember that red button. It's still waiting for your click. Don't leave it lonely. It loves company. Thank you from my heart for being here, for walking with me on this journey. You are not alone. We are together, day by day, building this road in the brain that leads to fluency. And keep this final phrase with you. Once you start thinking in English, speaking English becomes only a consequence. I'm Tommy Podcast from English Every Day. Bye-bye.